there's so much more that can be said in all these things. So for the sake of time, I think it'd be good to move to a few new bits. The first bit I want to do, actually, I'm going to share my screen briefly. Let me find the right section. Okay, so this is a quote that I posted on YouTube. It's from Climbing Mount Improbable, which is a book by Richard Dawkins, and the quote says, "It's grindingly, creakingly, crashingly obvious that if Darwinism were really a theory of chance, it couldn't work. Don't need to be a mathematician or a physicist to calculate that an eye or a hemoglobin molecule would take from here to infinity to self-assemble by sheer higgledy-piggledy luck." So this is like a very kind of classic Dawkins-esque quote, but I kind of wanted to kind of dive into this a little bit because there's a comment on here by, it's actually a really, really good friend of mine, but also a theist, which I want to kind of read out as well, because I think this is the sort of classic rebuttal or the classic statement that a theist would pose, right? And for those listening, the sort of comment goes, agree thus far. However, it's an interesting quote given Richard Dawkins's professed atheistic belief. Makes me wonder what he's leading to say next that would explain why this doesn't challenge his atheism. So I guess this is a question, John, really about the differences between chance and God. Theists claim that evolution has to either be based on chance or luck, or it has to be overseen by a God. There seems to be this sort of dichotomy that's always presented. Could you chat us through one more time about this sort of false dichotomy?
Yeah, well, I mean, Dawkins he's talking about that to say that, evolution is not a process it's not just luck. It's the evolutionary process. You do have these chance events, these chance mutations that create variation, but that variation is filtered through natural selection. And that process, descent with modification, which is, you could say, is a chance thing, acted upon by selection, that is a creative process. It is a natural creative process. So that's what he's arguing there. I think a lot of theists, this has just been true since the origin of Darwin's thinking, since he first started publishing his book, his thoughts on this. A lot of people have really struggled, like, how can nature be so creative? Because obviously organisms are extremely, like, beautifully designed, right, for surviving in their specific environments. How could nature do this? Darwin pointed it out. The process is so simple that people have trouble believing it or accepting it. But it really does work. It really, really works. And why it is that so you're asking, are you asking why Christians have rejected that?
I mean, that might be an interesting one to explore, for sure. I guess I'm just trying to dive into this dichotomy where it's either all chance or it's all God. It's almost like they can't understand that, as we've already said, it's kind of chance pushed through this sort of filters we said of natural selection. They kind of, I think they almost can't see natural selection as anything other than God's filter. But then when you look at natural selection, given like we've already mentioned the sort of the extinction of the dinosaurs quite a few times here, but against cataclysmic events, you kind of begin to go, this isn't like a theistic framework. This is something that's very, very blind, as we've already said repeatedly. So I don't know, take it in whichever direction you want, John.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think when people make claims like that, like your friend did there, he probably doesn't understand the process of evolution. That when people say that it's just a chance thing, yeah, they're ignoring the process of evolution. They're thinking somehow that the eye just popped into existence or the flagellum just popped into existence. That's not what happened. These are evolved structures. They have a long evolutionary history, this long history of trial and error production through this natural process of evolution. So basically they're just rejecting it, maybe because they don't understand it, or maybe because they're refusing to listen to it. They don't want to listen to it for some reason. I don't think that's necessary. There's a lot of Christians who don't have an issue with evolution. going back to my friend who thanked God for the sunset, again, he doesn't think that God handcrafted that sunset. He understands that there's a whole process, a physical process that creates sunsets, but he believes that God is somehow behind that all. And there are a lot of Christians that think about evolution that way. Of course, evolution is a natural process, but they think that God is behind everything in some way. And that's a type of thinking or type of theology that, I don't think is really in conflict with science. They're not trying to put themselves in conflict with science. You have this other way of thinking where, no, we think that God specifically designed the eyeball. It's like, I don't know, people are imagining some like Santa's workshop, but for God, where he's, designing everything and building it the way that a human would. That's silly. There's no need for that hypothesis, right? There's a process that can produce this. It's a natural process, the process of evolution.
It is interesting. I mean, one of the big things that stops me from being a theist is the problem of evil. And if you begin to posit the idea that there is a God that's behind something like evolution, got to kind of start asking the question, kind of, if this is the process that was selected out of, you imagine other better processes that would have been possible because God is theoretically all powerful, all knowing, all loving, etc., etc. It's quite a brutal way to bring about sentient beings. To then wipe them off the face of the earth, to bring another group about to wipe them off the face of the earth through extremely painful and arbitrary processes. It's all theoretically to bring about Homo sapien. I don't know. I find the whole thing really strange. Anyway, that's probably one for another conversation.
Yeah. But well, yeah. I mean, I'm not religious either, so I don't know how to respond to questions like that. There is this big group of Christians who accept evolution, and they do see evolution as the process that God used to create. How it is that they justify just the mass suffering. Evolution is a super wasteful process, right? Like tons of organisms die and suffer. They're born with defects and so on. And that's an essential part of the evolutionary process because, as you mentioned earlier, there are more ways to be dead than to be alive. And there's a lot more ways to have a negative mutation than a positive mutation. And those negative mutations get weeded out. But that's a painful, horrible process. So how it is that people align that with like a Christian God, for example, I don't know. I mean, one way that I would say, if I had to defend that position, is just like, well, you're assuming that you know better than God, right? That's what a lot of people will respond to. But I don't know how to square those two, but people do it, so
must be possible. I mean, yeah, people square all sorts of like weird stuff, right? So I'm not annoyed at people doing that. I do think that the story in Genesis, the early sort of first sort of primordial chapters of Genesis, the first 9, where God just creates stuff out of the dust, sounds like it's less painful, less awful. But anyway,
yeah, it does sound less painful. But
so I've created. If you enjoyed this clip, then head on over to Locals to access the full conversation right now. Supporters can access the video version and everyone can access the audio-only version of the conversation. I'll see you over there.